Safdie was born in Haifa on July 14, 1938. In what was then the British Mandate of Palestine, his Sephardic Jewish family was of the Syrian and Lebanese descent. In 1954, his family moved to Montreal, where in 1961 Safdie received his master's degrees in architecture from McGill University. After apprenticing with Louis Kahn in Philadelphia, Safdie returned to Montreal to oversee the master plan for the Expo 67 World's Fair. He later established his firm to undertake the design and construction of Habitat 67 and adaptation of his undergraduate thesis and major theme exhibition of the fair landmark demonstration. The project that pioneered a vision for urban housing using the technology of prefabricated construction as a breakthrough building type that continues to resonate today. Habitat 67 creates a vital neighborhood with open spaces, garden terraces, and many other amenities. Typically reserved for the single-family home, adapted to a high-density city environment, each of the 158 units had its own roof, garden, while pedestrian bridges and elevated streets now a signature to many of his designs, and public space and contribute to community building internationally recognized. Habitat 67 is considered a major development in urban architecture.
Habitat would be all about gardens, contact with nature, streets instead of corridors. We prefabricated it so we would achieve economy. And there it is, almost 50 years later. It's a very desirable place to live in. It's now a heritage building, but it did not proliferate.
He had no idea that his thesis, a concept for reinventing the apartment building, would soon make him world famous. It became Habitat 67, the centerpiece of Canada's World's Fair, Expo 67.
I was then 24. It was like a fairy tale.
Affordable apartments that were not cells. They were more like houses, accessible to nature.
Each of these boxes was prefabricated in a factory that we built. We installed the bathrooms and kitchens and all the windows and everything in the factory, lifted each box 70 tons worth by crane and lifted them one on top of the other.
Safdie admits being inspired by Legos.
Each apartment, which is made up of 2 or 3 or 4 of these boxes, has 1 or 2 roof terraces, one above the other all the way up. Architecture is designing and constructing our living environment. It is conceiving first and realizing second where we live, our cities, our buildings, our houses. It's the process of creating shelter and the environment in a broader sense. I think a meaningful building is one that truly affects the quality of life, practically, operationally, and spiritually, that one has in one's environment. So what's a meaningful building? If you do a school, it should be an inspiring place for learning. It should be a wonderful place for teachers and students to interact. If you're doing a performing arts center, it should be a place that is fantastic to hear music and see performances, that functions in terms of acoustics and sightlines, but also celebrates the public life that goes on, the ritual of experiencing cultural performances in a community. It's a community building, and so on and so forth. So what I'd like to talk about is something really that was very dear to Kahn's heart, which is how do we discover what is really particular about a project? How do you discover the uniqueness of a project, as unique as a person? Because it seems to me that finding this uniqueness has to do with dealing with the whole force of globalization, that the particular is central to finding the uniqueness of place and the uniqueness of a program in a building. actually have that kind of impact that music has on us, because that's beyond utility, it's beyond functional. It's to do with just spirituality.
The pavilions of Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, are actual bridges built over a flowing spring. At Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial and Museum in Jerusalem, Safdie built through a mountain.
Back to Yad Vashem, 3 years ago, after all this episode began, Yad Vashem decided to rebuild completely the historic museum, because now Washington was built, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and that museum is so much more comprehensive in terms of information, and Yad Vashem needs to deal with 3 million visitors a year at this point. They said, let's rebuild the museum. But of course, the Sikhs might give you a job on a platter. The Jews make it hard. International competition, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And again, I felt kind of uncomfortable with the notion that a building the size of the Washington building, 50,000 square feet, will sit on that fragile hill, and that we will go into galleries, rooms with doors and sort of familiar rooms to tell the story of the Holocaust. And I proposed that we cut through the mountain. That was my first sketch. Just cut the whole museum through the mountain. Enter from one side of the mountain, come out on the other side of the mountain. And then bring light through the mountain into the chambers. And here you see the model, a reception building and some underground parking. You cross a bridge, you enter this triangular room, 60 feet high, which cuts right into the hill and extends right through as you go towards the north. And all of it then, all the galleries are underground, and you see the openings for the light. And at night, just one line of light cuts through the mountain, which is a skylight on top of that triangle. And all the galleries, as you move through them and so on, are below grade. And there are chambers carved in the rock, concrete walls, stone, the natural rock when possible, with a light shaft. This is actually a Spanish a quarry, which sort of inspired the kind of spaces that these galleries could be. And then coming towards the north, it opens up, it bursts out of the mountain into, again, a view of light and of the city and of the Jerusalem hills.
The nature of his commissions often requires turning symbolism into structure.
I wanted the building drenched with daylight, and that's true about many of my buildings, but here it had symbolic value because light penetrating the building has something to do with peace for me. You know, it has something to do with transparency.
The United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. is meant to suggest the flight of a dove.
Hallmarks of Safdie buildings are dramatic curves, light, water, and public and green spaces. Embracing a comprehensive and human design philosophy in his buildings and writings, he has always stressed the importance of meaningful spaces that enhance community and the need to understand the essence of particular location's geography and culture, with huge multi-use buildings in Singapore and China. Marina Bay Sands presents Safdie's futuristic vision, blending artificiality with the natural landscape, adapting the design to the project's purpose. It also reinforces Louis Kahn's vision of monumental modernism. Safdie has continued to work at the mega scale. Today's megacities have densities 30, 40, and 50 times what cities were 100 years ago. These kinds of densities threaten everything we love about life: daylight, a sense of identity, and a sense of view. In the 20th century, urban developments, growing population densities, were made possible by new technologies enabled by tall buildings. According to Safdie, today's architecture should add a human dimension to these colloquial totalities. That's why you can see how important the full empty ratio in Safdie's high-rise building is, especially in the parts where the human point of view is more evident. Safdie is being modest. Other architects may not have a clue, but He certainly does. His buildings preserve and amplify the fundamental things that make human life.
The man in the pool is architect Moshe Safdie, a man of the world at the top of the world. The creator of this colossal Stonehenge, the 10 million square foot Marina Bay Sands resort, which dominates the Singapore skyline. 57 stories up, 650 feet off the ground, there is a park and the pool that seems to spill right over the edge.
Singapore, we had an opportunity, 10 million square feet, extremely high density, taking the concept of outdoor and indoor, promenades and parks integrated with intense urban life. So they are outdoor spaces and indoor spaces, and you move from one to the other, and there is contact with nature. And most relevantly, at every level of the structure, public gardens and open space. On the roof of the podium, climbing up the towers, and finally on the roof, the Sky Park. 2.5 acres, jogging paths, restaurants, and the world's longest swimming pool.
According to Moshe Safdie, there is 6 main principles of Moshe Safdie architecture. Shaping public reality, architecture as a suggestion, to be able to respond to the essence of the space, architecture as a constructible object, construction responsibility to humanize the megascales. Moshe Safdie believes that architecture is not just about designing buildings that bring together specific programs, but it is more about creating improving societies. He thinks that architecture is effective in many areas from human life to social behavior. As an architect who has done projects in every region of the world, he claims that every building he designed has a historical, geographical, and cultural relationship with the context which it is located. At the same time, he thinks that architectural design should not be unreal. The architectural design must be buildable. Moshe Safdie says that architects have responsibilities in energy conservation, ecology, and renewable materials. While achieving the goals of the customers, architects should not ignore the efficient use of resources. He thinks that high-rise buildings are inevitable due to the increasing population and economic conditions in the 21st century. However, he believes it is possible to design mega-scale projects more humanly. To achieve this, he frequently designs green terraces, large voids, and social areas in his buildings. In my personal opinion, he is an architect who has successfully applied his own principles in his buildings. However, it can be said that some of his projects he interferes with the natural environment excessively.
20 years ago, in a conference Richard and I were together, I wrote a poem which seems to me to still hold for me today. He who seeks truth shall find beauty. He who seeks beauty shall find vanity. He who seeks order shall find gratification. He who seeks gratification shall be disappointed. He who considers himself the servant of his fellow beings shall find the joy of self-expression. He who seeks self-expression shall fall into the pit of arrogance. Arrogance is incompatible with nature. Through nature, the nature of the universe and the nature of man, we shall seek truth. If we seek truth, we shall find beauty. Thank you very much.